The sledgehammer crashed through the concrete one final time, sending shards flying across what used to be Sarah's backyard paradise. She wiped the sweat from her brow, exhausted but relieved, until she heard the gate slam behind her. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Karen's voice cut through the summer air like a blade. Sarah turned slowly, her heart sinking as she saw the papers in her neighbor's manicured hands and the cruel smile spreading across her face. "You just destroyed the one thing keeping your property values up, honey. But don't worry, I have a solution that's going to cost you everything." The morning sun cast long shadows across the remnants of what had once been Sarah Chen's pride and joy. Chunks of concrete lay scattered like broken dreams across the yard, the pool's skeletal remains jutting up from the earth like the ribs of some prehistoric beast. She leaned against the sledgehammer, her shoulders aching from 3 days of relentless demolition, and tried to convince herself she'd made the right choice. "Mom, you sure about this?" Her 17-year-old son Marcus emerged from the sliding door, stepping carefully around the debris field. His voice carried that particular blend of concern and judgment that only teenagers could master. "We've been over this, Marcus." Sarah's voice was hoarse from shouting over the construction noise and from the argument they'd had the night before. "The maintenance costs alone were eating us alive. The liner needs replacing, the pump's shot, and don't get me started on the heating bills." Marcus kicked at a piece of broken tile. "Dad would have fixed it." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She turned away, pretending to examine the destruction so her son wouldn't see the tears threatening to spill. David had been gone for 8 months now, not dead, just gone, chasing some 25-year-old paralegal to Phoenix and leaving behind a mountain of debt and a family struggling to stay afloat. "Well, Dad's not here," she said finally, her voice steadier than she felt. "And this house is bleeding money we don't have. The pool had to go. But summer just started. My friends, we'll have to find somewhere else to hang out." Sarah hefted the sledgehammer again, muscle memory guiding her movements. "I'm sorry, honey. I really am. But keeping this thing running would have cost us the house." Marcus's face darkened. "Everything's different now. Everything sucks." He stormed back inside, the sliding door rattling in its frame. Sarah closed her eyes and tried to push down the guilt. She was 38 years old, working 2 jobs to keep the mortgage current, and slowly watching her relationship with her son crumble along with everything else David had left behind. A sharp voice cut through her thoughts like a serrated knife. Well, look what the cat dragged in." Sarah's blood ran cold. She didn't need to turn around to know who was standing at the property line, but she did anyway, steeling herself for what was coming. Karen Blackwood stood with her arms crossed, her perfectly coiffed blonde hair catching the sunlight like spun gold. Even at 9 in the morning, she was dressed like she was heading to a country club board meeting. Cream-colored slacks, silk blouse, and enough jewelry to fund Sarah's grocery budget for a month. But it was the expression on her face that made Sarah's stomach clench, pure, undisguised satisfaction. "Hello, Karen." Sarah kept her voice neutral, though her grip tightened on the sledgehammer handle. "I have to say, I'm impressed." Karen stepped through the gap in the fence, a gap that technically belonged to Sarah's property, though Karen had been treating it like her personal highway for the past 5 years. "When I heard the construction noise, I assumed you were finally doing something to improve this eyesore of a yard. But this..." She gestured at the destruction with a manicured hand. "This is so much better. It's my yard, Karen. My decision." "Oh, absolutely." Karen's smile was razor-thin. "Your yard, your decision, your problem. But here's the thing, sweetie, your problems have a funny way of becoming everyone else's problems." Sarah set the sledgehammer down carefully, every instinct screaming at her to be ready for whatever was coming. In the 5 years since the Blackwoods had moved in next door, Karen had made it her personal mission to turn the neighborhood into her own private kingdom. She'd gotten the Martinez family's fence torn down for being 6 inches too high. She'd had old Mrs. Patterson's rose garden declared a pest attractant and forced her to remove it. She'd even managed to get the city to ticket the Johnsons for parking their work truck in their own driveway. "What do you want, Karen?" "Want? Oh, honey, this isn't about what I want. This is about property values." Karen pulled a folded paper from her designer purse, the movement practiced and predatory. "See, when you have a beautiful in-ground pool, it adds value to the whole neighborhood. creates a certain ambience. But when you have a concrete crater, full of rebar and broken dreams, well, that's what we call a liability. Sarah's heart began to race. It's temporary. I'm going to landscape it, put in a garden. Are you now? Karen unfolded the paper with theatrical precision. Because according to the City Planning Office, any property that removes a permanent water feature without replacing it with an equivalent amenity is subject to a neighborhood impact assessment. And if that assessment shows a negative effect on surrounding property values. She let the sentence hang in the air like a noose. You're bluffing. Am I? Karen held up the document, and Sarah could see the official city seal at the top. I filed the complaint yesterday morning. Funny thing about having friends on the Planning Commission, they're very responsive to concerned citizens. Sarah's mouth went dry. What kind of equivalent amenity? Well, that's the beauty of it. The code is very specific. Pool for pool, spa for spa, or a combination thereof. Karen's eyes gleamed with malicious joy. Now, I know you can't afford another pool. Heaven knows you couldn't afford to maintain the one you had. But a nice jacuzzi? That might just satisfy the requirements. I can't afford a jacuzzi either. Oh, but you can't afford not to install one. Karen refolded the paper and slipped it back into her purse. The fine for non-compliance is $50,000, plus daily penalties until the violation is corrected. Of course, you could always sell the house, though I have to warn you, good luck finding a buyer with that mess in your backyard. Sarah felt the world tilting beneath her feet. You can't do this. Sweetie, I already have. Karen turned to leave, then paused at the fence line. Oh, and Sarah? I'd move fast if I were you. The inspection is scheduled for next Friday. 7 days to install a suitable replacement, or... She shrugged with mock sympathy. Well, I hear Phoenix is lovely this time of year. Maybe you can reunite with David. The casual cruelty of the comment hit Sarah like a slap. Karen knew exactly what buttons to push, exactly where to apply pressure to cause maximum damage. She'd probably been planning this moment since the day David left, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. Why? Sarah's voice came out as barely a whisper. Why are you doing this to me? Karen paused, and for just a moment, her mask slipped. Sarah caught a glimpse of something raw and ugly beneath the polished exterior, a deep, festering resentment that went far beyond property values or neighborhood aesthetics. Because I can, Karen said simply. Because someone needs to maintain standards around here. And because... She smiled, but it never reached her eyes. Because you've had it coming for a long time. With that, she turned and walked away, her heels clicking against the flagstone path like a countdown timer. Sarah stood frozen in her destroyed backyard, surrounded by the ruins of her former life, while the weight of Karen's ultimatum settled on her shoulders like a funeral shroud. 7 days to come up with money she didn't have for an amenity she didn't want to satisfy a requirement she'd never heard of. 7 days before everything she'd fought to keep would slip through her fingers like water. Sarah picked up the sledgehammer. Again, but this time it felt impossibly heavy. The fight had gone out of her, replaced by a cold, creeping desperation. She looked at the concrete rubble, at the house she could barely afford, at the neighbor's pristine yard visible through the fence gap. Then she heard it, the sound of Karen's sliding door opening, followed by the distinctive splash of someone diving into a pool. Karen's laughter echoed across the yard, bright and crystalline and utterly without mercy. Sarah's grip tightened on the sledgehammer handle until her knuckles went white. Something dark and primal stirred in her chest, something she'd been pushing down for months as her world fell apart piece by piece. She'd tried to be reasonable, tried to be the responsible adult, tried to handle everything with grace and dignity. But grace and dignity weren't going to save her house. And they certainly weren't going to stop Karen Blackwood from destroying what little she had left. Sarah looked at the sledgehammer in her hands, then at the fence separating her property from Karen's. A wild, desperate idea began to form in her mind, an idea so reckless and potentially catastrophic that it made her pulse quicken with equal parts terror and anticipation. Because if Karen wanted to play games with property values and city codes, maybe it was time to show her what happened when you pushed someone who had absolutely nothing left to lose. That evening, Sarah sat hunched over her laptop at the kitchen table, surrounded by empty coffee cups and crumpled legal documents. The glow from the screen cast harsh shadows across her face as she scrolled through municipal code after municipal code, her eyes burning from hours of reading fine print. Marcus had retreated to his room after their latest argument about dinner, another frozen pizza because she'd been too consumed with research to cook. The house felt hollow around her, filled with the kind of silence that screamed of abandonment and failure. Section 14.7.3, she muttered, clicking on another link. Replacement of recreational water features. The document loaded slowly, and Sarah's heart sank as she read the same bureaucratic language Karen had quoted. It was real. The code was actually real, buried deep in a subsection that most homeowners would never think to look for. Worse, the penalties were exactly as Karen had described, $50,000 plus daily fines. Her phone buzzed. A text from her sister Lisa in Seattle. How's the pool demo going? Send pics. Sarah stared at the message, her throat tightening. Lisa didn't know about David leaving, didn't know about the financial disaster, didn't know that her little sister was drowning in debt and legal threats. Sarah had been too proud to ask for help, too ashamed to admit that her perfect suburban life had been built on quicksand. She was about to put the phone down when another text came through, this one from an unknown number. Heard about your little problem. Might have a solution. Meet me at Rose's Diner tomorrow, 7 p.m. Come alone. A friend Sarah's blood went cold. The message felt ominous, almost threatening. But as she looked around her empty kitchen, at the stack of bills on the counter and the demolition outside her window, she realized she was already living her worst-case scenario. What did she have left to lose? She was about to close the laptop when one more search result caught her eye. Blackwood Development Group, municipal contracts and violations. Her finger hovered over the link. She'd never looked up Karen's family business before, had never cared enough to dig into their background. But something about Karen's confidence today, her casual mention of friends on the planning commission, nagged at her. The webpage loaded, and Sarah's eyes widened. Blackwood Development wasn't just some small-time contractor. They were major players in the region, with millions in city contracts for roadwork, municipal buildings, and infrastructure projects. The company president was listed as Robert K. Blackwood, with a professional headshot showing a silver-haired man who looked like an older, male version of Karen. Sarah dug deeper, following links and cross-references with the desperate intensity of someone whose life depended on finding ammunition. What she discovered made her stomach churn with a mixture of outrage and dark satisfaction. Over the past 5 years, Blackwood Development had been awarded nearly $20 million in no-bid municipal contracts. The same 5 years Karen had lived in the neighborhood, terrorizing residents with code violations and property disputes. The same planning commission Karen claimed as friends had approved every single one of those contracts. But it was the violation history that made Sarah's pulse quicken. Buried in a local news archive, she found a 3-year-old article, Blackwood. Development fined for wetland destruction. Company avoids criminal charges through settlement. The article detailed how the company had illegally filled in protected wetlands to build a shopping center, destroying habitat for endangered species and contaminating groundwater. The environmental cleanup alone had cost taxpayers $2 million. But somehow, no one from Blackwood had faced jail time. Interesting bedtime reading. Sarah spun around to find Marcus standing in the doorway, his hair disheveled from sleep. For a moment, she saw David in his features, the same dark eyes, the same stubborn jawline, and the resemblance made her chest ache. Just research, she said, minimizing the browser window. Go back to bed, honey. Mom. Marcus stepped into the kitchen, his voice serious in a way that made him sound older than his 17 years. What's really going on? And don't say nothing. Because you've been acting weird ever since that lady came over today. Sarah looked at her son, really looked at him, and saw the worry etched in the lines around his eyes. When had he gotten so thin? When had he started carrying the weight of adult concerns on his teenage shoulders? Karen Blackwood is trying to force us to install a jacuzzi, Sarah said finally. She's using some obscure city code about replacing pool amenities. If we don't comply in 7 days, we could face massive fines. How massive? Enough to force us to sell the house. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, processing. Then, so, what do we do? The simple question hit Sarah harder than any of Karen's threats. Marcus was asking as if this was their problem to solve together, as if he trusted her to find a way out of this mess, despite everything that had gone wrong. I don't know yet, Sarah admitted. But I'm working on it. Marcus nodded, then surprised her by walking over and squeezing her shoulder. Dad always said you were the smartest person he knew. You'll figure it out. After Marcus went back to bed, Sarah reopened her laptop with renewed determination. She had 6 days to find a solution, and now she had a starting point. If Karen wanted to use city connections and bureaucratic warfare, Sarah would play the same game. But first, she needed to understand exactly who she was fighting. The next morning, Sarah called in sick to both her jobs, something she'd never done before, even when she'd had the flu last winter. Instead of heading to the insurance office or the evening shift at the restaurant, she drove to the city planning office. I'd like to request copies of all permit applications and variance requests for the Magnolia Hills neighborhood, she told the clerk, a tired-looking woman with kind eyes and coffee-stained fingers. That's a lot of paperwork, honey. What are you looking for specifically? Code enforcement actions. Complaints filed in the last 5 years. The clerk's expression shifted slightly. You working on a story or something? We get reporters in here sometimes, digging around. I'm a homeowner, Sarah said simply. Someone filed a complaint against me, and I want to understand the pattern. 20 minutes later, Sarah sat in her car with a box full of documents, her hands shaking as she flipped through complaint after complaint, all filed by the same person, Karen L. Blackwood. The Martinez fence, Mrs. Patterson's roses, the Johnsons' work truck, and dozens of others, families Sarah had never met, properties she'd never seen, lives disrupted by Karen's relentless campaign to control every aspect of the neighborhood. But what made Sarah's blood boil was the pattern of approvals. Every single one of Karen's complaints had been fast-tracked through the system, approved without the standard review periods, processed by the same planning commissioner, Robert K. Blackwood's brother-in-law, according to the signatures. Sarah sat in the parking lot, surrounded by evidence of corruption so blatant it would have been laughable if it weren't destroying people's lives. Karen hadn't just been playing games, she'd been running a systematic campaign of harassment, backed by family connections and political corruption. Her phone buzzed. Another text from the unknown number. Did you find what you were looking for? Rose's Diner, 7 p.m. Don't disappoint me. This time, Sarah didn't hesitate. She typed back, I'll be there. As she drove home, Sarah's mind raced with possibilities. She had evidence of corruption, but she also had bills to pay and a son to protect. Taking on the Blackwood family would be like David facing Goliath, except David had divine intervention and Sarah only had rage and desperation. But sometimes, that was enough. That evening, Sarah parked outside Rose's Diner with 10 minutes to spare. The restaurant was a local institution, the kind of place where truckers and teenagers shared space over bottomless coffee and pie that had been made from the same recipe for 30 years. She'd eaten here with David on their first date, back when the future had seemed bright and manageable. She was halfway through a cup of burnt coffee when a woman slid into the booth across from her. Sarah looked up, expecting to see a stranger, and nearly choked on her drink. Hello, Sarah. Thank you for coming. Elena Martinez sat across from her, looking nothing like the broken woman Sarah remembered from the fence controversy 3 years ago. Elena's dark hair was pulled back severely, and she wore a crisp business suit that spoke of success and determination. But it was her eyes that made Sarah's pulse quicken. They burned with the same fury that had been consuming Sarah for the past 24 hours. You, Sarah breathed. You sent the texts. I've been watching, Elena said simply, waiting for Karen to push the wrong person too far. When I heard about the pool situation, she shrugged. I knew it was time. Time for what? Elena smiled, and it was sharp enough to cut glass. Time to destroy Karen Blackwood the same way she destroyed my family. And Sarah, if you're willing to listen, I can show you exactly how to do it. Elena reached into her briefcase and pulled out a thick manila folder, setting it on the scarred formica table between them. 3 years ago, Karen forced us to tear down our fence. Said it was 6 inches too high, violated some obscure setback. Requirement. Cost us $8,000 in legal fees and reconstruction. Sarah leaned forward. I remember. You had to sell your car to pay for it. My daughter's car, Elena corrected, her voice hardening. Sophia was 17, had been saving for 2 years from her job at the grocery store. She needed that car to get to her job, to get to school. When we lost it. Elena's hands tightened around her coffee cup. She had to drop out of her AP classes because she couldn't stay after school for study sessions. Lost her shot at the scholarship to state. The casual devastation in Elena's voice made Sarah's chest tight. I'm sorry. I didn't know it was that bad. Nobody ever knows how bad it is. That's Karen's specialty. She destroys lives in ways that look reasonable on paper. Elena opened the folder, revealing photographs, documents, and what looked like surveillance reports. But I've spent 3 years learning everything there is to know about Karen Blackwood and her family's empire. And Sarah, what I found is going to change everything. Sarah stared at the evidence spread across the table. What kind of everything? The kind that puts people in federal prison. Elena pulled out a photograph showing Karen shaking hands with a man in an expensive suit outside City Hall. Karen isn't just married to Robert Blackwood. She's his unofficial lobbyist, his fixer, his connection to local government. Every time she terrorizes a neighbor, every code violation she files, every family she destroys, it's all connected to Blackwood Development's business interests. Elena flipped to a map of the neighborhood, marked with red XS over various properties. Look at this pattern. The Martinez family, us, forced out, property sold to a Blackwood shell company. Mrs. Patterson, the Johnsons, the Hendersons on Maple Street. 12 families in 5 years, all targeted by Karen's complaints, all forced to sell at below market prices. Sarah's blood went cold as she recognized the pattern. They're systematically clearing the neighborhood. For redevelopment. Blackwood wants to tear down these older homes and build luxury condos. But they need the land cheap, and they need the residents gone. Elena pointed to Sarah Street on the map. Your house is the last piece they need for the eastern section. Karen's been waiting for the right moment to force you out. David leaving gave her the opening she needed, Sarah realized. Exactly. A single mother, struggling financially, isolated from support systems. You were the perfect target. Elena's voice softened slightly. But you're also the perfect weapon, if you're willing to use what I've learned. Sarah looked at the evidence again, her mind racing. What are you proposing? Elena smiled, and this time it was genuine. Karen thinks she's untouchable because she has connections. But connections work both ways. I've spent 3 years building my own network, journalists, federal investigators, whistleblowers inside the Planning Commission, people who've been waiting for the right case to bring the whole thing down. She pulled out a business card and slid it across the table. Amanda Foster, investigative reporter for the Herald. She's been working on a story about municipal corruption for months, but she needed someone on the inside, someone with standing to file complaints. Someone like me. Someone like you. A sympathetic victim with documentation, evidence, and, most importantly, Elena's eyes gleamed. A legitimate reason to fight back without looking like you're seeking revenge. Sarah picked up the business card, her hand steady for the first time in days. What would I have to do? Tomorrow, you're going to file a federal complaint alleging civil rights violations, corruption, and conspiracy to commit fraud. You're going to provide evidence that Karen's harassment campaign is part of a larger pattern of economic discrimination. And you're going to demand a full investigation into Blackwood Development's municipal contracts. That sounds like declaring war. Sarah, Karen declared war on you the moment she decided to destroy your life for profit. We are just choosing to fight back. Elena leaned forward, her voice intense. But I need you to understand, once we start this, there's no going back. Karen and her family will use every weapon they have against you. It's going to get ugly. Sarah thought about Marcus, about the house, about the demolished pool and Karen's triumphant laughter. Then she thought about Elena's daughter losing her scholarship, about all the other families driven from their homes, about the pattern of corruption that had been hidden in plain sight. What do you need from me? Elena's smile was fierce with satisfaction. Your story, your documentation, and your willingness to be the face of this fight. She pulled out a cell phone and set it on the table. But first, I need you to make a call. To who? Karen. You're going to tell her you've found a way to install the jacuzzi. You're going to ask for an extension, just a few more days to get the permits in order. You're going to sound desperate and defeated, exactly like she expects. Sarah frowned. Why would I do that? Because while Karen thinks she's won, we are going to be documenting everything. Amanda Foster has contacts in the FBI's Public Corruption Unit. They're very interested in cases where local officials use their positions to benefit family businesses. Elena's voice dropped to a whisper. But they need evidence of the crime being committed, not just the aftermath. Understanding dawned on Sarah's face. You want me to get her to incriminate herself. I want you to get her to brag. Karen's weakness is her ego. She can't resist gloating when she thinks she's won. If you play the desperate victim, she'll tell you exactly how she did it and who helped her. Sarah picked up the phone, her thumb hovering over Karen's contact information. And if she doesn't take the bait, then we go with Plan B. Elena reached into her briefcase again and pulled out a small recording device. Tomorrow night, there's a planning commission meeting. Karen always attends. She likes to watch her handiwork get official approval. You're going to be there too, asking for an extension on your compliance deadline. With a wire. With documentation. The FBI is very interested in hearing how municipal decisions get made when family members are involved. Elena's voice was steady, professional. But Sarah, I need you to understand something. This isn't just about your house anymore. If we do this right, we can expose the entire network. We can get justice for everyone Karen and her family have destroyed. Sarah looked around the diner, at the truckers and teenagers who had no idea. They were witnessing the planning of what could be the biggest municipal corruption case in the county's history. 3 days ago, she'd been a desperate single mother trying to keep her house. Now she was being asked to become the key witness in a federal investigation. There's something else, Elena said quietly. Something I haven't told you about why. I've been planning this for so long. Sarah waited. My ex-husband, Sophia's father, he took his own life 6 months after we lost the house. Elena's voice was steady, but her hands shook slightly. The stress, the financial pressure, the humiliation of what Karen put us through. He couldn't handle it. He drove his car into a bridge abutment on Highway 9. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She'd complained about David leaving, but at least he was alive somewhere, probably happy with his new life. Elena had lost everything, her home, her daughter's future, and her partner. I'm going to make sure no other family goes through what mine did, Elena continued. Karen, Blackwood has destroyed her last life, but I can't do it alone. Sarah looked at the phone in her hands, then at Elena's determined face, then at the folder full of evidence that could change everything. She thought about Marcus, about the frozen pizzas and the demolished pool and the empty house that no longer felt like home. Then she thought about Sophia Martinez, somewhere out there without a college scholarship because her mother's fence was 6 inches too high. Sarah dialed Karen's number. The phone rang twice before Karen's voice answered, dripping with false sweetness. Well, hello there, Sarah. I was wondering when I'd hear from you. I found a solution, Sarah said, letting exhaustion and defeat color her voice. For the jacuzzi. But I need more time. There was a pause, then Karen's delighted laughter. Oh, honey, I'm so glad you're being reasonable. Tell me all about this solution of yours. Sarah met Elena's eyes across the table and saw her nod encouragingly. I found a contractor who can install a used hot tub for $8,000, Sarah lied smoothly. But he needs 2 weeks to get the permits, and I have to get approved for a personal loan. 2 weeks. Karen's voice sharpened. The compliance deadline is 7 days, sweetie. I don't think the city can be flexible about their requirements. Please, Karen. I'm trying to do the right thing here. Isn't there someone you could talk to? Someone who might understand my situation. The line was quiet for a long moment, and Sarah wondered if she'd pushed too hard. Then Karen spoke again, and her voice was full of the cruel satisfaction Sarah had been hoping for. Well, I suppose I could make a few calls. I do have some influence with the Planning Commission. My husband's company has been very good to this city over the years, and Commissioner Williams is practically family. Karen paused, clearly savoring the moment. B. The Planning Commission meeting room buzzed with the usual mundane energy of local government. Fluorescent lights humming overhead, folding chairs arranged in precise rows, and the smell of burnt coffee from a pot that had been brewing since morning. Sarah sat in the back row, her hands folded in her lap to hide their trembling, a small recording device taped beneath her collar feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Amanda Foster sat 3 seats away, looking every inch the bored freelance journalist covering yet another tedious municipal meeting. Her press badge hung casually from a lanyard, and she occasionally scribbled notes on a worn legal pad. Only, Sarah could see the tiny wireless receiver tucked behind Amanda's ear, the nearly invisible thread of the professional recording equipment Elena had provided. Next item on the agenda, Commissioner Williams announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd never been challenged. Variance Request 2025-0847, Chen Property, Magnolia Hill Subdivision. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as she stood. The recording device felt like it was broadcasting her nervousness to the entire room, but she forced herself to walk to the podium with measured steps. Commissioner Williams, thank you for fitting me into tonight's agenda. Her voice was steady, though she could feel sweat gathering at the base of her neck. I'm Sarah Chen, and I'm here to request an extension on the compliance deadline for my property's recreational amenity requirement. Williams shuffled through his papers with practiced disinterest. According to the file, you have. He squinted at the document. 4 days remaining to install an equivalent water feature. What's the nature of your request? I've secured financing for a hot tub installation, but the contractor needs additional time for permits and delivery. I'm requesting a 2-week extension to complete the work. The room was quiet except for the scratch of Amanda's pen and the whisper of papers being turned. Sarah caught sight of Karen in the front row, her blonde hair perfectly coiffed, her posture radiating confidence. She hadn't even turned around when Sarah began speaking. Mrs. Chen, Commissioner Williams said slowly, these compliance deadlines exist for a reason. The city can't simply grant extensions because installations prove inconvenient. I understand, Commissioner, but I'm acting in good faith. I'm not trying to avoid compliance. I just need reasonable time to complete the work. Sarah let a note of desperation creep into her voice. I'm a single mother working 2 jobs. This timeline is it's impossible. For the first time, Karen turned in her seat. Her smile was sympathetic, almost maternal, but her eyes glittered with malicious satisfaction. She raised her hand slightly. If I may, Commissioner Williams, Karen said, her voice carrying easily through the small room. As the concerned neighbor who filed the original complaint, I'd like to address Mrs. Chen's situation. Williams nodded. Mrs. Blackwood, you have the floor. Karen stood gracefully, smoothing her cream-colored dress as she turned to face Sarah. First, I want to say how pleased I am that Mrs. Chen is taking this matter seriously. Property values in Magnolia Hills depend on all residents maintaining appropriate standards. Sarah forced herself to look grateful, though the words felt like acid in her ears. However, Karen continued, I'm concerned about the precedent we'd set by granting extensions. If every homeowner could simply request more time when compliance becomes inconvenient. She shrugged delicately. Well, where would it end? Commissioner Williams leaned forward. What would you suggest, Mrs. Blackwood? I think Mrs. Chen deserves consideration, given her circumstances. Karen's voice was warm with false compassion. Perhaps the commission could work with her, given my family's long-standing relationship with the city. Sarah saw Amanda's pen stop moving. This was it, the moment they'd been waiting for. What kind of relationship? Sarah asked, playing her part. Karen smiled, and Sarah caught the flash of ego that Elena had predicted. Well, Blackwood Development has been very good to this community. We've contributed millions in infrastructure, improvements, job creation, municipal projects. My husband Robert likes to say we are not just contractors, we are partners in progress. Commissioner Williams shifted uncomfortably. Mrs. Blackwood, while we appreciate your family's contributions to the community, I'm not sure. Of course not, Karen interrupted smoothly. I would never suggest that business relationships should influence municipal decisions. But Commissioner Williams, you know as well as I do that sometimes good neighbors need to help each other out. The commissioner's face flushed slightly. Sarah could see him recognizing the trap. Karen was speaking in code, but the implications were crystal clear to anyone who understood the dynamics at play. What I mean, Karen continued, her voice honey-sweet, is that Mrs. Chen seems genuinely committed to compliance. And given that your brother-in-law's construction company could probably expedite the permit process. She let the sentence hang in the air like a noose. The silence in the room was deafening. Commissioner Williams' face had gone pale, and Sarah could see other commissioners exchanging uncomfortable glances. Amanda's pen was moving furiously now, capturing every word of what was essentially a public admission of corruption. "I think," William said carefully, "that we should handle Mrs. Chen's request through normal channels." "Oh, absolutely," Karen agreed, but her smile never wavered. "Normal channels that recognize special circumstances. After all, Commissioner, Magnolia Hills is about to undergo some exciting developments. Blackwood Development has some wonderful plans for the neighborhood. Mixed-use facilities, luxury condominiums, real progress. It would be a shame if one property's compliance issues interfered with the greater good." Sarah felt her breath catch. Karen was openly discussing the redevelopment scheme, practically admitting that the code enforcement was designed to clear out existing residents. "Mrs. Blackwood," Commissioner Williams said, his voice strained, "I think we should discuss Mrs. Chen's specific request. Of course. And I'm saying we should approve it." Karen turned back to Sarah, her expression magnanimous. 2 weeks should be plenty of time, don't you think? Especially with the right connections helping smooth the way. She winked, actually winked, at Sarah, as if they were conspirators sharing a private joke. "Mrs. Chen," Commissioner Williams said, clearly eager to end the conversation, "the Commission will consider your extension request. You'll receive our decision within 48 hours. "Thank you," Sarah managed, though her voice sounded strange to her own ears. As she walked back to her seat, she caught Amanda's eye. The journalist's expression was carefully neutral, but Sarah could see the excitement beneath her professional demeanor. They'd gotten everything they needed, and more. The meeting continued with mundane business, permit applications, zoning variances, budget discussions. Sarah sat through it all in a daze, replaying Karen's words in her mind. The casual arrogance, the open admission of influence peddling, the barely veiled threats about neighborhood redevelopment. It was more than they dared hope for. After the meeting adjourned, Sarah lingered in the parking lot, pretending to check her phone while the commissioners and other attendees dispersed. She was about to leave when Karen approached, her heels clicking against the asphalt like a countdown. "Timer." "Sarah, honey," Karen said, her voice warm with false friendship. "I hope you appreciate what I did in there." "I do," Sarah replied, forcing gratitude into her voice. "Thank you, Karen. I know you didn't have to help." "No, I didn't. But I believe in being a good neighbor." Karen's smile was sharp with satisfaction. "You see, Sarah, this whole unpleasant situation could have been avoided if you just talked to me first. I'm a reasonable person, despite what some people might think." "I'll remember that." "Good. Because there's something else you should remember." Karen stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "What happened tonight, the extension, the favorable consideration, that was a gift. A one-time demonstration of goodwill between neighbors." Sarah's pulse quickened. "I understand." "Do you?" Because when Blackwood Development starts the redevelopment process in Magnolia Hills, there are going to be opportunities for existing residents. Good opportunities, for those smart enough to recognize them. But there are also going to be complications, for residents who aren't team players. The threat was barely veiled now. Karen was essentially offering Sarah a choice: collaborate with the forced gentrification of the neighborhood, or become another casualty of the Blackwood machine. What kind of opportunities? Sarah asked. Karen's smile widened. The kind that turn a small house with a demolished pool into a very profitable investment. My husband's company is always looking for local partners, Sarah. People who understand the community, who can help smooth the way for progress. You mean like Mrs. Patterson? The Johnsons? Exactly like them, though they weren't quite as receptive as I hope you'll be. Karen's voice carried a note of regret that didn't reach her eyes. It's amazing how much easier life becomes when neighbors work together instead of against each other. Sarah nodded slowly, as if considering the offer. And if I'm not interested in being a partner? The temperature in Karen's voice dropped 20 degrees. Then you'll find that compliance deadlines become much harder to meet, that permits take longer to process. The Herald's newsroom buzzed with an energy Sarah had never experienced before. Reporters hunched over computers, phones rang constantly, and the smell of coffee mixed with the electric tension of a major story breaking. Amanda Foster led Sarah and Elena through the maze of desks to a conference room where 3 people waited, A stern-faced woman in a dark suit, a younger man with a FBI badge clipped to his belt, and the Herald's editor-in-chief, whose silver hair and sharp eyes spoke of decades chasing truth. Sarah Chen, meet Special Agent Victoria Chen, no relation, unfortunately, and Agent Rodriguez from the FBI's Public Corruption Unit, Amanda said, closing the door behind them. And this is my editor, Bill Morrison. Agent Chen didn't waste time with pleasantries. Mrs. Chen, we've reviewed the recordings you provided. What we heard last night constitutes evidence of bribery, conspiracy, civil rights violations, and abuse of office. We'd like to move quickly. Sarah's legs felt weak. How quickly? This morning, federal agents are executing search warrants on Blackwood Development's offices, Robert Blackwood's home, and the Planning Commission offices. By noon, Commissioner Williams will be in federal custody. Agent Chen's voice was crisp, professional. We need you to understand that once this becomes public, you're going to be in the spotlight. Are you prepared for that? Before Sarah could answer, Elena leaned forward. Agent Chen, what about the other victims? The families that were forced out? We'll be contacting everyone we can identify. Your documentation has been invaluable, Mrs. Martinez. We are treating this as a RICO case, racketeer-influenced and corrupt organizations. If we can prove a pattern of criminal enterprise, everyone involved faces serious federal time. Agent Rodriguez opened his laptop. Mrs. Chen, we need you to walk us through everything again. Every conversation, every threat, every detail. The recording from last night gives us Karen Blackwood admitting to the scheme, but we need the complete picture. For the next 2 hours, Sarah relived every moment of the past week, the pool demolition, Karen's initial threat, the research that revealed the pattern of corruption, Elena's alliance, the phone call, and finally Karen's confession at the Planning Commission meeting. Agent Chen took notes, occasionally asking for clarification, while Amanda recorded everything for her story. There's one more thing, Sarah said as they neared the end. Yesterday morning, I found something else. She pulled out a folder sheet, brought from home. I went back through my mortgage documents, trying to understand how we qualified for this house in the first place. David and I were stretching our finances, but somehow the appraisal came in high enough to make the loan work. Agent Chen took the documents, and the appraisal company, Magnolia Property Assessments. It's owned by a subsidiary of Blackwood Development. Sarah's voice strengthened as she spoke. I think they've been artificially inflating property values to get families into mortgages they can't afford, then using code enforcement to force defaults and foreclosures. The silence in the room was profound. Agent Rodriguez whistled low. That's not just corruption. That's systematic predatory lending designed to facilitate displacement. If we can prove that pattern. How many families? Agent Chen asked quietly. Elena opened her own folder. Based on my research, at least 30 properties in 5 neighborhoods over the past 7 years. All following the same pattern, inflated appraisals, marginal qualifications, followed by aggressive code enforcement within 2 to 3 years. Bill Morrison spoke for the first time. Jesus. This isn't just municipal corruption. This is organized economic warfare against working families. Agent Chen's phone buzzed. She answered quickly, speaking in low tones before hanging up. The search warrants are being executed now. Mrs. Chen, I need to ask, are you willing to go public with this story immediately? Sarah looked around the room at these people who'd become her allies in a fight she'd never asked for. A week ago, she'd been demolishing her pool to save money. Now she was sitting in a newspaper conference room, helping to expose what might be the largest municipal corruption case in the state's history. What happens to my son? She asked. To our house. The house is safe, Agent Chen assured her. The code enforcement action against you was illegal. That case is dead. As for Marcus, we'll provide witness protection resources if needed. But, honestly, the Blackwoods are going to have bigger problems than retaliating against witnesses. Amanda leaned forward. Sarah, I need you to understand what we are proposing. This story goes live in 2 hours, simultaneously with the FBI arrests. Your name will be public. Your story will be front-page news. There's no going back from that. Sarah thought about Karen's confident smile, about Elena's daughter losing her scholarship, about all the families whose lives had been destroyed by systematic corruption disguised as neighborhood improvement. She thought about Marcus, who deserved to grow up in a world where bullies faced consequences instead of rewards. Do it. The next few hours passed in a blur. Amanda's story went live online at exactly noon, under the headline, Exclusive, FBI. Raids expose systematic corruption in municipal government. By 12:30, every major news outlet in the state was running the story. By 1 p.m., Robert Blackwood was in federal custody, along with Commissioner Williams and 2 other Planning Commission members. Sarah sat in the Herald's break room, watching the coverage on television with a surreal sense of detachment. Her own photograph appeared on screen, a professional headshot Amanda's photographer had taken that morning, while reporters discussed the brave whistleblower who exposed years of systematic corruption. Mrs. Chen. A young reporter appeared in the doorway. Channel 7 is here for your interview. Sarah's phone had been ringing constantly since the story broke. Requests for interviews, messages of support from neighbors she'd never met, and calls from lawyers offering to represent her in the inevitable civil suits against the Blackwood Empire. But one call had made her smile through the chaos. Marcus, calling from school after seeing the story online. Mom, you're famous. Everyone's talking about how you took down those corrupt politicians. Jake Martinez said you helped his family. 2. His mom is Elena Martinez? This is so cool. The interview with Channel 7 went better than Sarah had expected. The reporter was professional but sympathetic, focusing on the human impact of the corruption rather than the sensational details. Sarah found herself speaking passionately about the families who'd been displaced, about Elena's strength in pursuing justice for 3 years, about the importance of fighting back when institutions fail to protect ordinary citizens. But it was the ambush interview that made the evening news. Sarah was leaving the Herald building when a news van pulled up and Karen Blackwood stepped out, flanked by 2 expensive-looking lawyers. For a moment, Sarah froze, her heart racing with the old fear Karen had always inspired. But then she remembered the recording devices, the FBI agents, the federal charges that were already filed. Karen looked different, older, somehow, with dark circles under her eyes and a frantic energy that spoke of a carefully constructed world collapsing. When she saw Sarah, her composure cracked completely. You, Karen spat, ignoring the cameras. Rolling nearby. You destroyed everything. Do you have any idea what you've done? Sarah straightened, feeling a strength she'd never known she possessed. I exposed the truth, Karen. That's all. The truth. Karen's laugh was bitter, desperate. The truth is that progress requires sacrifice. Someone has to make the hard decisions. Someone has to push for improvement. What we did made this community better. You mean what you did to Elena's family? To Mrs. Patterson? To all the other families you drove out? Sarah's voice carried clearly across the parking lot, and she could see the cameras capturing every word, making money off their misery while pretending to care about property values. They were compensated fairly. They were robbed, Sarah interrupted. Systematically, deliberately robbed by people who were supposed to serve the public interest. Karen's composure finally shattered completely. You think you've won something here? You think this is over? My family has connections you can't even imagine. We have resources, political support. You had connections, Sarah corrected quietly. Past tense. Because Karen, when you threaten people and destroy their lives, eventually you pick the wrong target. Eventually, you push someone who pushes back harder than you bargained for. One of Karen's lawyers touched her arm, clearly trying to get her away from the cameras, but Karen shrugged him off. This isn't justice, Sarah. This is revenge. No, Sarah said, and her voice was steel wrapped in silk. Revenge would be if I'd taken a sledgehammer to your life the way you took one to mine. Justice is letting the legal system hold you accountable for the crimes you committed. Justice is making sure you can't hurt anyone else the way you hurt Elena's family. For a moment, Karen stood there speechless, the weight of her situation finally seeming to hit her. Then, without another word, she turned and walked back to the car, her lawyers hurrying to keep up. The reporter who'd been covering the confrontation turned to Sarah. Mrs. Chen, how does it feel to see the tables turned like this? Sarah looked at the camera, thinking about Marcus watching at home, about Elena somewhere in the city finally seeing justice for her daughter's lost future, about